Hello everyone. So in this tutorial I wanted to explain some IDEs and what the differences are and what you can use IDEs for different operating systems. So throughout this tutorial I'm going to be doing these tutorials on Windows because that's the system I have access to. I don't have access to a Mac and I don't have access to a Chromebook, so I can't really show those systems off the best. Um, but let me try to go over things first. Okay, so basically, like I was saying in the video about what softwares programmers use, um, there's lots of different softwares, and these are four IDEs I think are very common. This first one here is called GitHub Code Spaces, and it's based on Visual Studio Code. Um, so you can GitHub Code Spaces is an online integrated development environment, and in the installation tutorial I'll explain a little bit more about how this works, what it does, so stay tuned for that. Other than that, we have Android Studio, IntelliJ, and Visual Studio Code. So what do these do? First, these two right here are both based on IntelliJ. So this one is IntelliJ. You have the Community Edition right here, and you have Android Studio right here. So what IntelliJ is it's basically a um, integrated development environment for Java and Kotlin development. And so it gives you lots of neat features. It gives you that syntax highlighting, those suggestions and things like that. Through Visual Studio Code, though, you're going to need to install extensions to do those things. So Android Studio is based on IntelliJ. It looks very similar, and it does a lot of similar things. Like you can even work on Java projects in Android Studio, but I don't recommend it. I recommend installing both. So with Android Studio, it's a little bit different because this is primarily targeted at making Android apps. Now, the reason why we use this is because the FTC Control Hub, and let me show you a picture of that right now. Control Hub, this is actually going to use, it's running Android on this. It's basically an Android phone. And so we use Android Studio to develop the Android app for the FTC Control Hub. So if you want to do any type of FTC programming, Android Studio is definitely the easiest option in terms of full-fledged IDEs. You also have different um, online alternatives. I highly recommend Android Studio if you can use it. In the future, I will be explaining some alternatives to Android Studio. So, if you're on a Chromebook, the only way you'll be able to have access to any of these three programs is through the Linux mode. Now, I don't know which programs we're able to do. You can maybe look up how to do it, but it runs very slow on some Chromebooks. Some Chromebooks are very limited in RAM, and Android Studio uses a lot of it. So it can be kind of a difficult process to do on a Chromebook sometimes. And since I don't have access to a Chromebook, I can't necessarily demonstrate it. So not all Chromebooks will work the best with it. Some of them are just too underpowered to really be able to have a full-fledged coding environment. Okay, so now let me explain a little bit of the differences. So these two, like I said, they're based on IntelliJ. This one is for mostly Android apps, so it has lots of Android tools. It has an Android SDK installed, so that's a software development kit. You need it for making Android apps. It has all of Google's special like functions and things like that that work for Android apps, everything you can even see right here. I don't know, you might not be able to see this, but it says Google Pixel 7 Pro. There's an Android emulator built into it, so you can test your app, you can deploy them like that. It's all built for making Android apps. IntelliJ doesn't have any of those features, so it's a little bit different, but yeah. So those are these two right here. They're full-fledged integrated development environments. Visual Studio Code, on the other hand, is a lot lighter on your system, and so these often take up a lot more resources than VS Code. VS Code is a little bit lighter since it's just a text editor, and then it has extensions that make it run better for Java. So you can't really use VS Code for FTC, however. You can use Android Studio. You can probably do it somehow. I just haven't figured out the way how to do it, and I haven't bothered because Android Studio is pretty good. But VS Code we do use a lot for FRC. So FRC, I'm going to show you right here, RoboRio. For deploying onto the RoboRio right here, we use Visual Studio Code, and that lets us um, basically do the same type of thing as FTC. So yeah, that is all of these. And then the last one right here is GitHub Codespaces. Basically, the best way to explain it is that you're connecting to an online computer over the internet that's running VS Code on their computer. So this is useful for Java development, but you can't really use this for um, FTC. You really need to have, or really the best option is Android Studio on a Windows or Mac OS device, or Linux device, sorry. So Windows, Mac OS, or Linux, those are probably your best options. And this will also work on a Chromebook running in Linux mode. So, but I've never tested it, so don't quote me on that. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was an explanation that hopefully helped you understand the differences. Hopefully I wasn't rambling too much, and hopefully you understand the differences between these four softwares and why we use these different softwares. Thank you so much for watching, and happy coding.